Hey guys, welcome back to the PAWCast. Today I've got Molly, one of our CVTs, in the studio, so here we go. I guess in terms of stuff that I wanted to talk about, obviously you're kind of the, what's the right word? You're like a black sheep, a little bit, where like you stand out in many ways, but you know, there's the driving factor of your personality type is just unique to the setting that you work in. I have no idea what your life was before you worked here. Like, I remember when you started because Carlo and Katie and Annie, I think, came to a meeting and like they ended up talking about you was like right after you got hired, and they're like, yeah, we got a unique one now too. But I guess other stuff, you know, you taught me how to round. There's all sorts of options. I mean, what's on your mind? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, we can start back from before I worked at PAW. I had multiple jobs. A couple of them were being a general manager at Arby's. I used to sell cars. I've worked at a dog boarding house place. And now in the summer times, I just go and tinker on Yamaha's jet skis, wave runners, side-by-sides.
Okay.
And now I'm here.
So, like, how did you get to being a technician? Like, why pick what it is that you do?
So when I was a kid, I did want to be a veterinarian when I grew up. High school took me down some unfortunate roads that kind of led me to where I am.
Okay.
That led me to where I am now, but stopped me from going to school to be a vet.
Okay, gotcha. So, like, when you were in high school, that was kind of the dream, was to be a doctor of vet med, and
Since I was a little kid.
okay.
But high school kind of just...
Yeah, I get it. And we all lived through high school. I understand that. I guess what was it about being, you know, the idea of being a vet that was intriguing to you? Like, why? Is it just a love for animals, or
Love for animals.
That's it?
That's it.
Fair enough. And then kind of got derailed a little bit, which happened. I think that happens to everybody. Like, everyone has their own story about like how high school like just kicked them to the left a little bit.
Mine wasn't a little bit. It was as far away as you could possibly go.
I really want to ask what it is, but I feel like it would be terribly inappropriate for the setting.
Maybe for the podcast, yes, but
right. Fair enough. We can abstain then. We don't necessarily have to go there.
Just for left. Just.
See, that's an interesting. All right, here. How about this? Here's where I think we can tie some stuff together. You had a vision, right, of like where you thought life was gonna go, and then that got bumped in however which way it did. And then through the course of a number of different choices, mostly ended up in the place you thought you were going to 10 years later. I actually don't have no idea how old you even are. So
Almost 29.
So yeah.
So sad.
I mean, I'm almost 30, so, you know, I feel it.
There we go.
But like, what do you think, and what I'm kind of driving at is, the fact that you're of a high D type personality, which for those that aren't aware of what that is, driver, high dominance, kind of see an obstacle, just bury your head down and get through the obstacle, and not necessarily as focused on being methodical, but just seeing the result and being like, I'm going to get to it, which in this world, but also in our clinic, because of the nature, I think, of the industry, that is a character trait that is unique. Do you feel like that was the thing that kind of circled you or back around to where you wanted to be?
It pretty much started with me going from job to job to job. Yeah. And it was like, okay, I like these jobs. I'm not happy in these jobs. So then I looked into a bunch of different colleges, a bunch of different things I could go for. And then conveniently one night, I think I was sitting down with Eric, and we were talking about what I wanted to do. And it was wound up back here, got in touch with researched Madison, their veterinary technician program. My mom looked at a bunch of vet schools for me to go to and how to apply for them. And then we found Globe. And then it was just one of those things where it's like, this is what I want to do. And I just kind of decided by myself without like his input. Like, yeah, he knew I was talking about going back to school, but it was just like, nope, I'm going to go do this. And I don't give a fuck what anyone else says. So then it was like, oh yeah, by the way, surprise, I'm enrolled back in school and working 3 jobs at a time while I'm going to school full time to make sure I can pay the bills.
That sounds terrible. I worked full-time in college at one job, and I thought I was going to die most of the time because, like, there just wasn't nearly enough hours in the day. How did you pull that off? Because, like, technical school is just as arduous as any other type of school is. Like, how did you kind of muscle your way through that?
It was pretty much, like, my jobs were pretty nice at arranging schedules. So when I was at school, like I didn't work there, and then when I was at one job, I was at the other job, and then it was like finish this job at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, drive to the next one to start at 5 p.m. and work until 1 a.m. and then all of my homework would be done either in breaks between classes, in between jobs, on days off, or sitting outside while I'm getting dinner cooked for me, making flashcards, sitting at my picnic table while shoving food in my face. So I made it work, but by the time I was done, I was exhausted.
Done. Yeah, like that process. Like I mean, number one, it was probably out of necessity, right? But also, I think it's another one of those things that kind of shines a light on you, right? Because like most people wouldn't necessarily put themselves through that. I guess when did you kind of figure out that there was something in the way that you prefer to behave or think or act, whatever it is, that is notably different from the people that tend to be around you, especially in this industry?
When I started here at the clinic at PAW.
Yeah.
That's when I realized that my personality type isn't one you see very commonly, and a lot of people find it to be offensive or rude, or that you're just straight up a bitch because you don't care how people think about you or how you say things. Yeah. You're just going to say it. Right.
And I guess, like, how was that learning process? Because for me, I've gone from a lower D, again, so like more methodical, a little less aggressive, and mine's picked up over the last like 7 years now, 6 years, out of conscious choice. Like I've seen value in being more assertive. Essentially, I haven't gotten near to the point of being maxed out or anything like that. But how was that? Because you started with it, and now it's been a learning process since then. Walk me through that. Like when you learned about it, and kind of how you've been able to use it to your advantage or sometimes to your disadvantage.
So it kind of came about, like, I remember Annie telling me after I did the assessment, like, yep, we were sitting down in the office, Katie, Carlo, and myself and Ben, and we brought up your assessment, and it was that same thing, like, oh, we have a unique one here, and just the high D personality. And then it came from Annie and Katie, and even Carlo trying to teach me how to learn how to communicate better, because when I first started, it was, she's just being a bitch. We don't want to listen to her because she's just being a bitch. And it was all 3 of them working on how to teach me how to communicate with people to still keep my blunt personality, but not come across as I don't care. Now that where I'm at is I can still stay blunt with everybody, but I know how to say it in a nice, polite way. But there are times where it's like, I don't care. This is how it's just coming across, because it's either going to potentially affect patient care or something down the long road of that patient being hospitalized, whether it's outpatient, inpatient. It's like, nope, you're not doing what you're supposed to, or something gets missed or something or anything like that. And it's just like, and I don't care how this is coming across. Like, it's just coming out now.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing that shows most people like a high D type personality is it's less of an attention on the emotional reaction to a conversation, right? Because a lot of times, especially culturally, but in our industry, even more specifically, we have a lot of high I, which is myself, and high S type people. When you focus a little bit more on those central variables, what happens is you get more people focused. And if you focus more on D and C, which I believe those are your two leading variables.
Yes, they are.
You get more results focused, and there's only so much time in the day, so many minutes within a conversation, and when you say that you don't necessarily care, I think that's what you're referring to. Is it's like you're just gonna rip the Band-Aid off, more or less, right?
Yep, like it's just coming off like out of my mouth how it wants to. I don't care if it's gonna hurt your feelings. We'll come back around, we'll talk about it, but right now it's just going to come out how it needs to come out. Like Carissa has experienced that a couple of times. Hannah and Nicole, one of the other MSS that I work overnights with, loves it when I'm like that because she says she learned so much. I don't let her get away with anything, and it's just I say it how it needs to be said.
But not everybody loves it.
No, not everybody loves it, which is weird. When I found out that she loved my personality and me being blunt and direct to her, I'm like, we're talking about the same person, right? Like she's actually referring to me and not somebody else.
I think that was, when you and I first started working together, especially when I was working days and they had the significant like shift overlaps and that sort of stuff. And you'd end up at the clinic till 10 o'clock in the morning after your shift.
Just bullshitting around.
Right. That was one of the things that I really kind of felt like I wanted to push, just in general conversation, especially when you ask questions, because it's really hard to be an outlier in a behavioral sense in any setting. So let's go to the other extreme. Let's say you're in like a super high pressure, like sales type environment, where typically a high D type personality is generated, but also encouraged, and you're just generally more attracted to that type of a setting. Well, if you're more of a people focused person, it's really uncomfortable for that person to be in that setting. Well, vice versa. That's kind of yourself here. And what I've seen with other folks, and myself included, is when you're an outlier and you try to shift your behavioral style, it's super stressful. And honestly, it's just so disingenuous most of the time that you forget who you are and no one else knows who you are because you don't know who you are either. So I don't know the number of times that I said, well, it's fine, just be you, just know how to do it a little bit better. And I think that there's been some significant improvements that I've observed in the last 2 years, which, by the way, I've been here for 2 years now. Isn't that?
I mean, this last year in this clinic has kind of just been like,
poof.
What happened? Like, okay.
Yeah, I can't believe that, we're recording this on March 24th. It's been more than 11 months that we've actually been in the new clinic, and it just feels like yesterday. I mean, I think we actually started like training in the new building a year ago this week.
I remember my first overnight in the new clinic and just coming in and the whole place is a mess. And thank God I had Sarai that night, and we're just like, and we're just going to go and we're going to put all this stuff away and hope it works.
And that was like the first month.
Even though we got it put away that day, it was like everything, you'd come in for your shift and it's moved from one cabinet to the next to the next. And you're like, has anybody seen this now?
That was a whole process. I'm actually really thankful I wasn't a part of that process, but that, again, that's another one of those things, like, you learning who you are and not necessarily deviating away from it, but learning, the pros and cons of it is, I think it's one of the cooler success stories of kind of my, if I can take any credit for it, career up to this point, is like you're really good at communicating in the way that you know how to communicate, and you've kind of taken that to another level of not necessarily like going away from it, but at the very least being, maybe this is the right wording, more empathetic to the person's position before you jump into what you're going to say. Like, you still know how you're going to say it, but it's like you take in all the variables, I think, a little bit more than you did before, which is a hard thing, I think, for a lot of the more dominant type people to do, especially when they're intelligent and they can think really quickly, which I believe you also have a higher processing speed. So if you run out ahead of somebody and you're already to the result, a lot of times what happens is people forget that the other person in the communication has to go on the journey at their own pace. And if you just jump to the result and they don't get to go on that journey, it's really hard for them to appreciate what you're trying to tell them. And that take a breath moment, I think, is just, it's not necessarily changing what you're going to do, but it's like, well, we're just going to let them catch up. Does that kind of sound right?
It's actually a lot like that, because now it's like I see something and it's like, difficult caregiver, for example. And instead of just being like, okay, I'm just going to jump and I'm going to handle this, it's like, okay, let's step back a minute. Like, okay, this is what's going on with them. Like, they're concerned something is really wrong with their dog, but we brought it in. It's been evaluated by a veterinarian, medical staff. Like, it's deemed stable, but they're still at that point where it's like, this is what's going on. They're becoming belligerent. And it's like, nope, let's take a breath. Let's take a step back. I'm going to coach you through how to handle this situation so you know how to do it next time. Which actually has worked out a lot better for me now, instead of just being like, nope, I'm just going to handle it myself because I have 15 other places I need to be on some nights.
And you're referencing other staff, right? So like letting other folks, like kind of not necessarily telling them to be more like you, right? But you're also like not letting them be super squishy.
Like we're going to hear them out for a few seconds.
Yeah.
We're going to understand where they're coming from, and then we're just going to tell them how it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't have to be my blunt personality. Like, I don't like to always pull that out against caregivers because it kind of catches them off guard, but it's like, you don't have to do that, but let's just re-hone in on everything they were already told on the phone when they present or when they walk into the clinic. Just remind them of that. And normally once when you do, they're like, oh, okay, yep, you're right, we're fine.
Yep. And that was, I know I've had to pull that a couple times, where it's like you give it that first run and then that doesn't work. Well, then it's like, well, let me go get the big gun out here.
Yes, I think I actually did that to you one day too. Because it was like, I just remember the caregiver was constantly yelling at me. I asked him to stop. He was swearing at me, and I'm like, I'm done. I hung up the phone and I walked right up to you. I'm like, Ben, I tried. Like, this is where we're at. I hung up. He's probably calling back.
And he did. It was a whole thing that day. But and the occasion that I'm kind of referring to was, there was one, I was like off my game entirely, and somebody was trying to railroad us, and I'm like, I need the driver. I need the person that's just going to tell that, like, not going to care what this person's going to say, and she's going to tell him what it is. And I think both of those situations turned out well. In the one where you were having trouble communicating with that guy, about, I don't even remember what the problem was, honestly, but he was frustrated, and like there was just some sort of a lapse in not necessarily what you were saying, but how it was being portrayed and then received. And if you know the kind of the fundamentals of communication, like there was a breakdown on two sides, which is really hard to overcome. And rather than turning it into like an I'm right, you're wrong, it's like, we're just going to pause this, essentially, in a somewhat forcible manner.
It's fine.
And he did it. He ended up, I think it was the next time the phone rang, it was him. And I was like, hey, I know what's going on. I'm going to throw you on hold. And I think I was in back for like 20 minutes talking to him because I'm not trained in this, so I got to get different answers from different people. But I'm like, I hear you, and I want to get you the right answer. And ultimately, the patient got served. And I think that was the cool part about that whole goal, right? Is we acknowledged that there was some error on multiple sides, but we took control of whatever we could, because we couldn't change who we were talking to. And it's like, well, this isn't working this way, let's try it this way, because we want this patient to eat, and we have to communicate to this gentleman how to make that happen.
And I remember all of the stuff you were telling the caregivers, everything I was telling him on the phone, and for some reason he just wasn't perceiving it the way I was telling him. So it was like, okay, I'm done getting yelled at, I'm done being sweared at, like we're just gonna hang up now.
For sure. And there's even if I when I go and listen back to this, just tonality, there's sometimes it's just, let's assume that guy has had a rough time with somebody who has a similar tone of voice than you, and he he has a predisposition to not liking somebody that talks the way in which you talk. It's very possible. Whereas somebody like on the other side, right, where I tend to be a pretty people-focused person in the way I communicate and where my attention goes. And then I have somebody that would come in, with their patient, and they try to railroad what they want our process to be. Well, if I'm super soft about it, they're just going to push harder because they can hear it in tone of voice. And there was some stuff that I did in working up front to adjust the way in which I spoke to limit that type of an exchange. But when it really was like, no, this is the way that we do it, that was the time when I had to be like, Molly, I need you to just go walk up front for like 10 seconds and just communicate to this caregiver what's going to happen, because she's thinking that what I'm saying is what we would like to have happen.
There have been a couple of times at the old clinic and a little bit here at the new clinic before we went into like the whole COVID where no one's allowed inside. Carla would actually come out of consults and look at me and be like, and now I need your D personality to go in this room and go over this estimate. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like, it's like, just go in and do what you do. I'm like, okay, sounds good. But there have also been times where I've got called up front for caregivers because they aren't listening to caregiver support, and they're just like, we just need Molly. So it's like, okay, here I go. What's going on? It's like, okay, I got it. It's fine.
Well, and I think that's just kind of the cool part about working here. And I this is the only vet that you've been a technician at, right? So you worked outside of PAW?
I mean, I did my extern at a day practice.
Okay, yeah.
And it was a nightmare.
Tell me more about that.
So we'll just take a little side trip. So I finished up Globe, had to do my externship. I wanted to do it just strictly at PAW. Yeah. But because PAW was considered only overnights, in emergencies at that time, not the full roundedness that we are now, it was, nope, you have to do some of it at a day practice to get the wellness and all of that experience in, and then you can do the PAW aspect of it. I went into my day practice. For the first 2 weeks, I could just watch. Okay. I wasn't allowed to restrain. I wasn't allowed to try to draw blood, place IV catheters, or anything like that. So it was just watching, which to me that's a nightmare from me. And then my first night at PAW, they were having me do blood draws and trying to place catheters and restraining patients, and in surgery, like not monitoring by myself, but I had either Kendall, Trevor, or Ronnie. Both Kendall and Ronnie no longer work here, but they were in there. They were teaching me, and then it'd be back to like the day practice, and it's just very limited. Like I could never excel my skills in that type of environment. Don't understand what it was, but I just couldn't. And then like I'd read the comments they would leave on my paperwork. One day I went in and I had a migraine, and they wrote on there, had a migraine, not very talkative today. The next week, too talkative, because I was asking questions on how to learn things, how to become better, and it was too talkative this week. Last week it had a migraine, and then it was a bunch of different things, and I was like, if I was in that environment, I would be out of the field by now.
Well, and I think that's kind of why I wanted to focus a little bit of this conversation on that black sheep type nature, because I think that was what was being observed. Is I don't know. So the way in which I understand emotional reactions is emotions don't have words. We've just tried to associate words, even though there is not a language component of understanding emotion. And when somebody is frustrating, like I don't know what to do with this, I'm going to try to guess the word to put onto this. So sometimes it's not talkative enough, and sometimes it's too talkative, but it's not because they're actually being like that. It's just I have no idea what to say, and I have to say something, but I know that I don't know what to do with this type of a personality, so I'm just going to say that they're too talkative or not talkative enough. And then I'm going to be done with it because I know that there's a period at the end of this sentence. And for people that are, Brianna was probably similar to that, so I'm actually really excited for when she gets here because she's also a higher D type personality that was lost before she accidentally found PAW, which I think is the coolest story ever. But it was the same thing where, she was surrounded by people that didn't understand her, and then was like, oh no, well this is just who you are. So like, just be you.
And I relate to that 100%. Growing up and going through high school and even jobs before I started here, just People just didn't understand my personality type. And it was like, but this is who I am. Like,
Right.
you're just going to have to get over it. Now that I know who I am and I understand my personality better and I've learned how to talk, like, learned how to actually phrase things where I can still be me, but kind of sugarcoat it for them a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, if they don't like it, it's like, I don't care. Like,
Right.
okay, then I just don't need you in my life. It's fine.
And I think that that's, one of the things about being so unique in that way is it provides us a good opportunity to kind of look into the balance between shared purpose and individuality, because at least for myself, I struggle with like communicating how it is that we do that. It's really hard to be like, hey, we all come here for the same reason, but we all do it in our own way. And, because the majority of the people that work in the industry, but because of that, the people that work here, we have a lot of shared traits, high altruistic people, the more higher I's, higher S, higher C's. I think currently the only two high D type people that work here are you and Katie.
Yep.
There might be one more that's mixed in there, but it's close.
Brianna will be, but
So between that and then like high regulatory for value, high theoretical, high systems judgment is most of the people that work here. All that sort of stuff, there's some commonalities, but when you have an outlier in one of those variables, what tends to happen in environments where they don't necessarily know how to handle that is it's like, well, I don't like that. She needs to come be like this, like be a part of the benchmark. That's the phrase that I've heard too often. Whereas for us, it's like, no, like, how do you serve the patient? Because this is how I do it. And now how do we utilize both sides? And like, how was that process? Because like, you didn't know necessarily that you were going to walk into an environment that was going to say, Molly, I want you to serve the patient in the way that you do best. So I'm sure that and I don't necessarily know how clear that process was, because you've been around since like day one.
5 years. I started almost a year after Carlo and Katie bought it, I think. It's been almost 5 years now. Yeah. So when I first started, we had like the core values and they had the process, but to be completely honest, so much has changed since 5 years ago. And now that even though we were structured around serving the patient back then, it's something you hear everyone always saying during your shift. You serve the patient. It's what we do. So everything has changed. Now it's just like you serve the patient and you're going to learn how to do it with your personality, which for me, it's just been like, yep, doesn't matter what I have to do to get through this, especially being on overnights. It's like, I'm just going to do it. It doesn't matter what's in my way. Like if there is a brick wall, I'll just, as you say, I just punch my way through it. It's just what I do. And it's like, okay, I'll run myself into the ground, but at least my patients are taken care of.
Right. And like, when you talk about some of the things that have changed, what are you kind of referring to? Because I know some of the stuff that I've seen change, but like, what do you think has been some noted differences? And maybe it's just the way that we talk, or
it's the way that we talk. It's also the way that we teach staff. From at the other clinic, we're 10 times busier now than we were then, so it's easier to get the hands on, but we also have different, Autumn, for example, who's in charge of training MSS. Instead of having 5 different people train one person, it's one person training them that specific way. Trevor with CBTs, Annie doing all of her Annie things that never seems to end for her. But then it's like Katie and Carlo taking individual doctors and training them. So it's, instead of just being like everyone's going to show you different ways, like what works best for you and what works best for you, it's everyone now has the same process.
How has that been from an implementation of care perspective? Because now that since Autumn's been brought on as medical staff coordinator, or as support staff coordinator, that's how we've hired like 15. So at least something like that. How has that transition kind of been? Has it been easier to kind of bring people into the mix of the triage flow and all that sort of stuff.
The nice thing is by the time each one of them is done doing however many hours, how long they train with Autumn, they're all at the same point.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether they work during the day, in the afternoon, at night, no matter who you are, you can still go up to them and they have the general skill set that they need. And you can always advance that at whatever speed they're at. It's not like, oh, have you learned how to do this? Have you learned how to do this yet? Where at the old clinic was like, well, I think I learned this. I think I know how to do this. And it's like, oh, I never learned how to do that. Everyone knows the basic skills that they need for a shift.
Yeah.
And it makes it 10 times easier to pick it up and be like, okay, you know how to do this. Let's advance that now. Like you're almost to that point.
Yeah, that's actually a cool kind of example of the way that I don't know if you've ever heard this or if you listen to the podcast about the star chart and kind of how that all originated out of Riola's brain.
Yes.
Yes. But that's a really good example of how clarity creates consistency. And also, then you get to the point of focusing on competence, and then what happens? Their confidence goes through the roof, right?
Yep.
And I think that's one of the coolest things. Noticing at this point, actually, as like a third party, because I'm not on the floor anymore, and I'm still here enough. But it's I'm a little bit separated, so I can see things happen in like bigger gaps.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing to watch somebody go from like that first day of like, I'm really quiet and reserved and I'm just gonna tuck in and hope that I don't look like an idiot, to like 3 weeks later. And for me, it feels like one day, and they're just doing everything. They just know how to do like all of the stuff.
Yep. Emily's a great example. When she first started here, I think it took more than 3 weeks to really get her to open up. But now that she has, it's like Emily has the best one-liners. She catches you off guard all the time. Like she has everyone always laughing. But it took her a while to warm up. And at first it was like, you could tell like really hesitant on what she had the basic skills down, and then it was advancing them. And now it's like, hey, Emily, go get this catheter in. Go try to draw this blood. Go do this. And she just goes.
Yeah. And she does. And actually that's cool too, because you two, from a data perspective, are really different. Like I think she's like a 2 in the D variable. You do share a high C. And that's her leading variables, like high attention to detail. It's super methodical. So in the right environment, we've seen that works, where we can have 2 people that are pretty substantially different in communication, background, all that sort of stuff. Like you and Emily outside of work, I would argue probably wouldn't have found each other in the world. But the cool part about being here, and the reason that I came here ultimately was we made it work. It's like, no, we all are here for the same reason. Now, how do we do it well? Does that sound right in working with Emily?
Yes, absolutely. When Emily started, actually, after she finished with Autumn, she was thrown into overnights with me. Yep. And Annie briefly talked to me about Emily's personality and how it is a complete polar opposite of myself.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a learning curve for me, which actually helped my communication a little bit, because me being very, very blunt with people, it actually taught me that I sometimes would have to circle around to Emily and be like, hey, do you understand why I was like this or what I was saying? Or she'd ask me a question and be like, I don't have time right now to go into the long answer. Let's follow up before I end my shift. So working with Emily has definitely taught me how to communicate better. But I did notice like polar opposites of personality, where it's like we both love the process and we love sticking to it. But where I will go punch through a brick wall, she will still go the steps to get to the same end result.
How do you feel like that's translated in like efficiency of workflow, or just like kind of maintaining the pace in which you're hoping for as the triage director, and the way in which she actually implements fulfills the things that are necessary? It's
actually really nice, because now I can, now that she's I don't know how long she's been here now, but it's like, okay, Emily, I need you to make this estimate, and then when you're done with that, I need you to come back and do this, this, and this. And it's just one of those things where I can lay 5 or 6 things on her at a time, and I don't have to ever worry about them being done correctly or not. And if she ever has questions, she always follows back up. But it's really nice, because when we're slammed some nights and I'm the only CVT on the floor after 8 p.m. and I rely so heavily on the medical staff. And it's like, I just need you guys to just like take these 6 orders and just go with it. and then come back to me when you're done. And they do it.
Yeah. And I guess with that, your number one, there's never really been a fear of asking questions along the way, right? So like, even though, you preface the way in which you communicate with people, like, hey, if I give you these 5 things and you come to me with the third one looking for an answer, like, I'll give it to you, but it's going to be quick. It's going to be snappy, and it might hurt a little bit, but it's not because I'm trying to be a mean person. It's just like, we're just moving, we're just going. And when you can give the color before it actually happens, it doesn't necessarily make it not sting, but it does make it sting a little bit less. And now, like, when I'm here and it's wild and crazy, and I'm just walking through and watching everything happen, like, everyone's just going. And the cool part about it is there's no hesitancy in how you're communicating, because we either understand how everyone does communicate, or I guess that's actually the way in which it is, right? Like, we know how people hear things, we know how people say things, and it's just there's no emotional management when we're on the floor. And I like, honestly, like, to me, that's the only way that this place works, because when you're 10 times busier than you were 3 years ago, it's like, well, there's only so much time for words anymore, guys.
Yep, it's coming out of your mouth however your brain wants it to. And whenever you're on the floor, you can tell everyone is so focused on what they're doing. The emotional aspect is out of it. And then when we kind of slow down, if we had a critical patient, multiple euthanasias in a row, which we know that can happen, everyone kind of just checks in, or we just kick back, we joke around a little bit. But it's like, when we need to go, everyone just goes, and no one cares how they're communicating with anyone, because we're just doing what we need to do. We're talking processes through. I remember Caitlin's a good example. I think it was Christmas. There was like 3 hours where it was just Caitlin and I on the floor. Yeah. And I think her and I we counted, it was 15 patients, just her and I and a doctor in that 3 hour period. Because all we did for that 3 hour period, we just communicated. Yeah. Yep. And we didn't care how we said things to each other. And we got them out the door. Like, we worked through it fast, and it was a challenge, but.
Yeah. And it's not like you not caring turned into being belligerent. No, you weren't bullying on each other, right?
Yeah, no, we were not bullying on each other. It was just coming across very blunt, like, I'm doing this, I need you to do this, or her being like, hey, I'm doing this, can you do this? Even though I was directing triage, she was still telling me what she needed for me to help her.
And that kind of collaboration is super rare, in my personal opinion, which, my gut data is, it's a gut feeling, but I've seen enough teams and know the way in which people talk to each other and talk about each other and all that sort of stuff. But actually, I'm doubting you're familiar with it, but have you ever heard the story about I don't remember his name, the guy that landed the plane in the Hudson River, and the process by which they landed the plane?
Sully.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that story? That's what this place is all the time, right?
Yes, it is.
Like the idea of it doesn't matter, guys. We got to land this plane. Like, there's no time for you to think I'm a mean person as I tell you what to do. I'm probably going to say some F words along the way. And because of that fact, we're going to land this plane. And ultimately it worked. And that is one of the most notable story. Like, with the stuff that I read, it comes up like 30% of the time in all the books I read, because it's such a cool example of an event that everybody tries to emulate. That's actually trying to create a culture of true collaboration. And the reason that it's written about so much is because it's freaking hard to do. Like, you think about what it was 4 years ago, especially once 24-hour came around, like, I know that the collaboration wasn't there, and I didn't even work here. Like, how do you kind of see what that growing process was like, going from, we've had a lot of attrition, number one. There's been a lot of people that couldn't handle it, but also, like, how, when you talk about the workload that Annie has, like, a lot of that is teaching education about communication and culture and how it is that things operate around here, and how to fit into that well with also being yourself. Like, tell me a little bit about what that transition was like from a first person perspective. And you can use as many naughty words as you have to.
So just transitioning from being open the few hours that we were to 24 hours. I remember because I'd work the 6 p.m. to midnights or whenever I would leave because I was always here late. I wanted to learn. I wanted to be hands-on with things. That's how I learned. To then coming over to 24 hours, I remember it started out as this gradual slow. Like, we had a couple patients during the day, 6 p.m. would come, just get hit with patients. And we got really good at working through whatever patients we had in that clinic by midnight, 1 a.m. And then it slowly started actually getting busier and busier and busier. And then all of a sudden, like, your 4 to midnight people are staying late until 2, 3, 4 in the morning to try to help clear those patients out. But from like the old clinic perspective of being open 24 hours, it's like, we saw some patients. Now here it's average patient counts, 45 a day or something like that?
That's what last year was,
Yeah,
yes.
so
in which I currently, we are on pace we're outpacing last year already as well.
Yeah, and then transitioning to coming into here and then COVID happening, and it was just like this big shit show of... I have no better way to explain that. It was just this big shit show of everything that could possibly happen at once. It did. Move into a new clinic, try to get set up, bam, COVID. Now we're fucking swamped.
Yeah.
And it kind of hasn't stopped. Our average patient count where we thought like, oh yeah, we can move in. We'll have some time to settle in, figure shit out. Nope, just full send, and it hasn't stopped. And then it's been insane.
Did that surprise you, the COVID reaction to us going from like busy to like, holy cats, like there's a lot of patients?
So I expected us when we moved in here. I expected us to get busier. I should say. Like we all knew that was going to happen. It's a bigger clinic. Like we're going to have more doctors, more kennel space. And then COVID happened, and it's like I'd come into my shift, and the triage bar is full of clipboards, and it's like, what the fuck is going on?
like every time.
Every day you walk in here, it was just look at the bar, and it's like, okay, here we go again. And then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you have X, and X patients that all need surgery tonight. And you're like, okay, let's just do it again.
Yeah. How has that been in terms of kind of like, the sustainability or like you personally? Because like, I think that out of, all of our folks, and again, knowing that you're unique, and the reason that we wanted you to maintain that was like, well, we know that the person that can put the helmet on and beat through the brick wall is going to be able to handle these higher stress situations, probably a little bit better, but also more frequently. Generally speaking, your durability is probably a little bit higher than some other folks is. I know it's greater than mine substantially. I remember I would, when I was working, the day shifts, like I had like a 4-day maximum. And like I would get to day 5, which I could do 5 days, but the 5th day was gonna be rough. And the 4th of July span at the old place, the last one at the old place was a 5-dayer, and everybody worked.
That's a rough one.
That was like when I realized that was just too much for everybody. And but like you talk about this like just walking in, and that when you get here at 6, there's going to be 15 patients that are here at varying stages. Like that's the go-to number. If it's not more than that, how have you kind of taught yourself to be okay with that, I guess?
Well, one of the things that I've always kind of been good at is the lack of sleep, functioning on a lack of sleep. I did it when going through Globe as a teenager, and then also just I can still function on a lack of sleep even if I'm not working. The way I've kind of coped with coming in and having 15 patients on the bar, and I've learned like I kind of ease my way into the shift, get the doctor that's coming on shift with me, Heather or Rhiannon, like get them settled in with our hospitalized patients. And one of the things Carlo taught me is like, we're just going to do it. Like it doesn't matter. We're just going to do it. And I've learned non-linear triage where it's like, okay, you're here for a urine recheck, but you have 13 patients ahead of you. Let me just get this estimate going and
find your efficiencies, basically.
Find my efficiencies, find my way to still make sure all the patients are getting served. But when I have the downtime to run a urine, be able to do that to kind of speed up some of the other processes that are going around in the clinic. Walking in and having 15 patients on the bar, it's still kind of like one of those what the fuck moments, what's going on? But it's what we do. And then adding in a couple surgeries throughout the night now, too.
And that's, when you had walked in, we had kind of asked about how that sometimes it can kind of wear on you a little bit too. And I think that happens to everybody. Working here makes you, it's not an intentional shift, but it changes you a little bit because you see more stuff, you see sick patients, especially for my perspective and caregiver support is you take people that have literally never worked in this world, and you immediately accelerate them almost to the extreme of seeing everything that's sick. The higher euthanasia volume by nature of seeing everybody that's sick, and higher emotional volatility, that sort of stuff. And I think that is a little bit of an easier transition because there's none of that middle ground. There's none of the expectations of sunshine and rainbows get thrown out the window pretty immediately.
I can't. One of the newer CSS that came in, and they're like, "Oh, she's really cheerful and really pleasant." And me being the person I am, just kind of joking around with them. I think it was Sid who said it, and I think they said it about Trinity, and I was just kind of joking around. Sid's one of the newer MSS hires who's caught on really, really quickly. She's like, "Oh, she's really cheerful and really pleasant." I just turned and looked at Sid, and I'm like, "Don't worry, we'll fix that." just out of the blue, and I'm like, "Oh shit, I can't say that."
I definitely know that you have said that more than once about multiple people.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure you said that about me,
and I'm pretty sure we broke you of your happy sunshine and rainbow.
It was the first time I remember. My first week of working here, the first time I learned how to shift my voice, literally the first day I was on the phone by myself, 4 phone calls in a row. 2 of those 4 I got F-bombed at by people.
That's how it goes.
Right, and that was Annie was sitting right next to me, and she's like, "Yeah, you're gonna learn how to talk to make that not happen." And now we've part of that learning process and getting more people in the right places to avoid that, it has been pretty good. And I kind of losing my train of thought here. So what were we talking about? Oh, I love doing these sometimes. There it is. This place changes you, right? How have you, one thing, I don't know if you've seen as much change from, kind of day one to now as maybe some other people have. You take Hannah, for example. Hannah was...
Hannah CSS or Hannah MSS?
Hannah MSS.
MSS.
Yeah, yep. So Hannah was probably the most bubbly person that has ever worked here. And if she's listening to this... I know that she drove you nuts.
We were talking about that the other night and how bubbly and cheerful she was and trying to get her to focus. And we were talking about it with Heather. When she first started, Heather and I had to yell direction at Hannah, and she knows this. Yeah. And Hannah actually informed me that when she first started working with me, she would go home and cry at night because of me. I was like, "No, you didn't." She's like, "Yes, I actually did." I'm like, "Oh, crap."
Yeah.
but Hannah's made the biggest personality. She still kept her very bubbly, very cheerful personality.
Yeah.
But to where she is now, that sunshine rainbow part of her has kind of drawn back a little bit and allowed her to push forward more in utilizing her skills and understanding the medicine.
And I think that's the biggest variable to notice in that shift, right? Is I think anytime that you walk into a long-term engagement, whether it's work, a relationship, a hobby, anything will change you in some way, shape, or form. And this place is no different. And that's super bubbly, super cheerful stuff. The word I can come up with, you get a little bit jaded, especially if you don't know what to do with it. But that's not the right term, because there's a part of jaded that's wrapped up in bitterness. And I don't know if we really have a problem with bitterness or resentment in terms of us versus them, in terms of caregivers and patients. The thing that changes is you go from one reality to another, and you have to be you have to just be different in a different reality, because when the variables are substantially different, if you maintain what you are over here, that reality is going to run you over, whether that's emotionally or just the physical demands get to you. that sort of stuff. And the cool part about the way that the training process and onboarding and all that has shifted that is the reality becomes is real much sooner. So it's less of a slow burn, and we've actually probably catered more towards the way that you would have originally told somebody what working here is like, where it's like, no, we're just gonna drop the hammer.
Surprise.
Right. And what that's done is it's given people the opportunity, if they want to try it out, they're welcome to, and we know that if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit, and there's no hard feelings, anything like that. And if they know it's not right off the bat, like, thanks for your time. Like, I hope you find success elsewhere. And then when it's right, they're stuck. Because they know, like, not that they're like poor, like badly stuck, but like there's the thought process is, well, what else can I do now? Because now I really like the fact that I know what reality is and I know how to act in it. And I think that was one of the tipping points. I'll have to ask Hannah about it, but I think that was kind of her tipping point. Was she had a little bit more of the slow burn, which we learned a lot from, and I think she learned a lot from too. But for her, like, now that she's in that portion of reality, she's still Hannah. Like, everyone knows that Hannah's still a polite, she's a very people-focused person. She cares a lot about everybody that's here, whether that be team or caregivers.
Yep.
And she wants the best for everybody that's here. But it's also kind of provided her some additional language, and not just foul language, in the way in which she communicates. And part of that's due to having worked with you a substantial amount, but also just being able to be herself in a new set of reality. Now, coming back to you, like, did you know that the reality was what it was? Because I think a part of it is that you did, and that was why the emergency side was more appealing to you, the overnight, the when it's wild type stuff. So was that a part of the, like, was you just more attracted to that? And then since then, how, you've actually maybe gone the other way, where you were maybe a little bit too abrasive and you've come back up. How has that process kind of been from like original attraction to wanting to be here to today?
So always, since Katie, and I can't remember the other lady's name, came to Globe and told us about one of the emergency cases, I've always been extremely interested in emergency medicine. It's just the fact of just go. And then you get this critical patient that comes in and your brain's just like thinking about this patient all night. That's where your whole focus is. And yeah, I started out extremely abrasive, and now today it's like I still love every aspect of the emergency medicine part. Working overnights, I see more of that. Like, if you ask me a wellness question or ask me to do a dental, it's, I can do it.
Yeah.
It's okay. But now it's not as abrasive, and just kind of learned how to just not lose myself and not get emotionally attached to things that go on.
How have you found that you've seen like notable differences in like the way you think, or like how, I guess maybe were you more reactionary before? Were you more volatile before? And
yep,
definitely how has that shifted?
Definitely, someone would say something to me before, and if I didn't like it, it was just like full send. Now it's something, someone has said something they don't like to me. It's like, okay, let's stop. Let's think. How do we want to phrase this? Or we're just going to ignore it. So definitely working here has taught me how to communicate better outside of work as well.
Yeah. And I guess like how has that kind of worked out in like personal life, or, working at some of the other places that I know you kind of moonlight at? How has that kind of gone?
Everyone at Yamaha, minus Eric, because he's dealt with me for 10 years, they're pretty much all terrified of me. Minus the owner, Jerry, or his wife. But
you've been there for a long time, like
3 years I've been helping out there, so they all know my personality. Yeah. But some of them, like it's like, I don't hate you. I just like, it's kind of fun knowing that you're terrified of me. I'm just going to keep making it worse to mess with them now.
So I guess is that that part of your life. Number one, it's a hobby, right?
It's a hobby.
So you really like that world.
Gives me an excuse to be outside and in the sun and keeps me busy during the summer.
Right,
so.
right. And then I guess a part of that too is, do you kind of do you take the kid gloves off there a little bit too? Do you ever like find yourself like reverting back to some of like the more reactionary stuff? Because like I know for me, I'm a kind of to a fault, I'm a professional at wearing different hats. Where in one setting I can kind of be one person, and in another, because every reality for me is a little bit different, I can be a different person. And if actually one of the things that surprises a lot of people, because those that know me know that I tend to not shut up, kind of like right now. But if I'm in an environment where I don't know anybody, I'm really, really quiet. I don't talk to anyone. I'm really uncomfortable. So like, I tend to kind of be a little bit of an enigma based on where I'm at. For you, do you tend to be more consistent, like whatever you are, where you are? This is Molly. Take what you get, or
so it's actually it's funny you brought that up. Eric and I were talking about this not too long ago. It doesn't matter where you run into us, if it's at work, at Walmart, or you come over to our house for dinner. We are going to be, we're conveniently who we are, no matter where we are. You're not going to see us at Walmart and have us be happy and cheerful, pleasant people. We're just going to be who we are. Our personalities never change. We never put on different hats, as you say. He still looks like he wants to kill everybody, but that's fine. But I'm still that extremely blunt person. We're at home, it's the same exact thing. Like, you come over, we're going to give you a hard time, and I'm going to be blunt about stuff you do to my property that you shouldn't be in. Yeah. I don't care if you never come back because you don't like it.
Right. Like, I guess, how do you see that? Like, I mean, you've been with him for 10 years, so obviously something's working, right? But have you found that to be like an easier way of kind of going about things, where it's like, I'm just me, and if you like it, great. If you don't, great. At least we both know. It
is just how we are. Like, 10 years being with him, it's taken him quite a while to get used to my personality, but for the most part, this is who I am. You don't like it, you can get over it. For him, it's the same thing. Like, he's turning 30 this year and doesn't have any wrinkles or anything like that. Like, it's straight face all the time, which is fine. I've gotten used to it, and some people are like, why are you always so crabby? Why don't you ever smile? And it's like, it's who he is. Right. Like, it's fine.
Yep. It's just even. It's just even.
It's just even. Like, when he's happy, you just kind of learn.
Yep. If you could tell yourself anything 5 years ago, what would it be? Totally on the spot question.
That is really on the spot question.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite ones, though, because it does make you, like, I know that I would have a hard time answering that for myself, because I would want to be, like, super contemplative about it. But, like, in your gut, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Like, thinking about who you were 5 years ago, right around, when you were in school, versus, with the wisdom that you have now, what would you want to tell that person?
God, I have no idea. No idea.
Was there ever a point in your life where the way in which you behaved provided you a lack of confidence because so many people, or like there was a number of people telling you to stop being that person?
Kind of when I was in high school.
Yeah?
Yep.
Tell me about that.
It was just a lot of people didn't like my personality, from teachers to like the school guidance counselors, whatever you want to call them, to like superintendents, other students, people I used to work for, previous bosses. They just didn't like my personality, and they're like, you can't act like this. And they didn't know how to handle me. I was in high school. I like to rebel against everything possible. It's like, we don't know how to handle this, so we're just going to keep pushing you down and trying to make you fit everybody else and in their social groups, and it didn't work for me.
And then, like, obviously, we kind of referred to it earlier about some of the probable shenanigans that Molly got into when
the
she was
extremely
in high
far
school.
left.
Right. We got bumped left, and we were like, you know what? Let's just keep going that way.
Yes, exactly.
I guess with that, was there ever like other jobs, anything like that? That were trying to put the binders on you a little bit, or anything like that?
Yep, working at Arby's and selling cars. Believe it or not, have that wonderful, intense personality that you think would go good selling cars. It was just you can't have this type of personality. We need you to be this instead.
Okay. But how were your results though? Like, could you actually sell?
Oh, I could.
But they just didn't.
Oh,
like
people
you.
like everybody loved me, well, customer wise, but the company itself didn't like me and didn't like who I was, and it was like this expectation that you have to change who you are in order to work here or in order to fit in. Okay.
Were you? I'm assuming that communication within the team was probably a little bit strained with that kind of a mindset. Does that was that the reasoning behind it, or did they ever give you a reasoning behind it?
Not that I can honestly remember. It pretty much came down to one night. I had enough of being told, like, oh, well, this is how you should do it. This is how you should communicate. Like, you can't be yourself. And I just kind of stopped showing up.
Oh, that's one of the other. It was just
one of the, like, and I'm done. Like, thanks.
I guess that's another thing, too. Like, do you think that you are quicker to make decisions like that than maybe some like your peers or family or just your general like friend group, anything like that?
I definitely make decisions faster than my friends in my friends group, where they'll sit down and pros and cons and can we do this? Let's go talk about it with significant others, and I'm just like, and I'm done. just really quick on the spot, like. Yeah. I don't care. I'll figure something out.
How do you see that play out with, kind of like the long term, right? Because one of the things that I think that's mixed up is knowing the variables that I focus on. You've got a high D type personality, which is going to be really direct, really decisive. So that's kind of the operative word. Like, once a decision's made, I'm going to be decisive and I'm going to go with it, right? Whereas where it gets mixed up is the difference between systems thinking and practical thinking. And typically when you're a systems thinker, you analyze a lot of variables at whatever speed in which you can, and you make a decision based on where you were and where you're going and where you are now. Versus a practical thinker will tend to see a solution and seek to acquire whatever solution is possible, or a problem, solution, go, right? Like they're more worried about like what's around them, not necessarily how they got here or what the impact of that decision will be. Now, that person can get you out of some hot water really, really fast. My mom is a super practical thinker. Like she has the ability to systems think. However, when it comes to generating solutions, she's the fastest person that I know. But for you lean more systems. And there's a weird correlation between those two things, because when you're really decisive, especially if you don't let somebody go on that journey that we kind of talked about earlier, they think that you're just making some crappy snap decision because you just want to get out of hot water, where in fact you're just sticking to the decision that you made based on the variables that you've acquired. I guess, like, have you realized that, number one, and how have you, if you have, how has that played out, or how have you communicated that to other people?
I've somewhat realized it. I'm able to process and figure out that pros and cons list really, really fast. Yeah. Like, what do I like? What do I don't like? Okay, yep, I'm leaving. Yep. But normally once when I make that decision, it's just, that's what I made. And don't really care what anyone else thinks, if they like it or not. It pretty much is, it's like when I went to school, like laid out the pros and cons, I was able to do the breakdown of everything I did. But then when it came time to making the decision to go to Globe, it's like, nope, this is where I'm going. And surprise, I'm back in school. Right. Like one of those situations. For me, it's just, we're going to make it really, really fast, and we're going to get it done and over with, so we're not hemming and hawing for the next 6 months.
How do you do with that in terms of like managing hindsight? Like, do you look back?
No.
Like, never?
Never.
See, I find that...
Oh, wait, actually, I can look back on one situation.
Okay.
Don't go to Globe University.
Does Globe? I don't even think Globe exists anymore.
They don't. But
Yeah.
like I can look back on that one. And, don't go to Globe. You're in way too much debt. Way too much.
Fair enough.
Yep.
But other than, because even with that, right, you can take that as an example. But why are you looking back? Well, that reality has projected itself into today. Like that's when Carlo spends a lot of time, especially when we're students in here are really near when we had Lauren and Christina and talking about like the debt to income ratio, that sort of stuff. That is not necessarily a I regret the decision because it was a crappy decision. It was, well, I didn't know this was going to be a bad decision, but now I have to live with the real consequences. So although hindsight is now 2020, it's not because I regretted the decision at the time. It's just now this consequence sucks that no one told me about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So like, but kind of going back to where I was hoping to kind of, I guess I know generally the people that listen to this they're mostly in vet school or vet techs that are in school or early career, because part of the way in which we talk, focusing really heavy on force of change, a big part of that is saying not everybody on your team should be the same. In fact, encourage diversity. With the folks that are in the mentorship system at MSU. I don't know if you're familiar with that really much at all, but it's
in conversations with Carlo, that's about it.
Yeah. So the big thing with that has been a promotion of diversity and promotion, not necessarily like, gender and race and all that sort of stuff, which AVMA is doing, which they're going to do what they do. We have no control over that. But it more or less focusing on behavioral and saying you can be unique, you can be yourself, you can be different, and you can still realize a level, of success that you might not think you can. And when I think about that idea of looking back and having regrettable decisions, like I do it. I don't necessarily regret a whole lot of stuff, but I'm really, really good at being retrospective. Like a part of. And my brain is putting a thought together, so I apologize as I work my way through this a little bit. Yeah, we're just going on the bunny trail. I think that when you talk about the school decision and like you're living with real consequence, right? And I'm talking about diversity. Well, the thing that I don't want to have happen to people is being a diverse person and then shifting who you are into something else and then living that out and then thinking that it was the school's problem.
So definitely not super happy I went to school to become a CVT.
Right.
Super happy, love the career choice I made. Mm-hmm. I hate the consequence of the mass amounts of debt I've acquired from it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't go back and I wouldn't change where I went to school from. I met Annie at Globe University. It's just the consequence of the amount of debt that I have that I will be paying off. Yeah. Unfortunately, until like I'm 85.
But now and don't get me wrong. I think there's a whole thing that we could go and talk on that. But the thing I want you to think about is imagine if you also changed who you were, and every time that you left work or you showed up at work, whatever, there was some sort of like this seed of like, I don't like this person because it's not me. And like, if you had a system that said, nope, you got to be this type of, like that time, when you were working in day practice, and there were maybe not a forceful shift, but there over time, people potentially will put you into a box of, I want you to be this person. And that slow transition turning into almost you resenting yourself. And you can then say like, well, in hindsight, I wouldn't have gone to school. Like I would have regretted entering the industry because now look at who I am. I'm living with real consequences from like a behavioral and emotional perspective.
I started here as this personality that I loved and this person that I liked. And now I'm all the way down here and I can't stand who I am. I wouldn't be able to do that if I actually had to go through that slow change and change my personality and still be in this field. I would be at that position where it's like, I don't like any of this anymore, and I'm going to go find something, and it would ultimately probably be one of the reasons why so many people leave the field, CVT-wise, doctors, and unfortunately burn them out too. is trying to be someone they're actually not. So they come into work and they have to have this persona of who they are to make everyone else happy, but then they have to leave work and now they have to make everybody else happy outside of work to fit their expectations of who they should be, instead of it's, nope, this is who I am. This is just who you're going to get.
And that's what that's why I wanted to focus on that, because you're not afraid of that, and it's definitely a highlight of being a higher D type person. Like you're less focused on the people variables and more focused on results variables. But there's value in that. And that's why I love the assessment for what it is, because it doesn't put you in a box. It says you can be any one of these things at any time. It's find what you're trying to do and pull that tool when you have to. Like you're going to have your tendencies and who you are, but if I really have to be, I can be the most decisive person in the room. I don't necessarily want to be, or I don't, if somebody else is going to be, I'll defer to that person to be them. But you can do that, and when I'm thinking about the people that are going through that process of professional development, like the early stages, you're gonna graduate with a debt load. That's shitty enough, right? Don't put yourself into a box where you don't like yourself too, because I think that's a cool part of, maybe I'm just coming now to the realization that that's what's actually happening, is it's not just the debt load, right? Like when you talk about the industry overview, there's loss of self-worth. That's a part of that is debt to income ratio, and this is kind of how those two things play together. Like, don't lose who you are and be so indebted to this thing that you thought was going to be good. Like you either have to stay in it or you have to live with too much debt for the rest of your life. I guess, am I off my rocker?
No,
you're always good. You're always good at telling me when I'm like going a little bit crazy.
It honestly, it makes perfectly good sense. Like you come out of school, like don't change who you are to fit into a field. Find a clinic, or a shelter, or wherever you want to work within your CBT realm, doctor. Find a clinic that will allow you to grow as a person, but never expects you to change who you are. That way you still always have that self-worth. You always get the fulfillment that you want. And then you come into work, you're like, yep, this is who I am. And you leave work, this is who I am. And it's like, okay, yeah, I have some debt. And that's just a small portion of it now, where it's like, I love my job. I can walk in here every day saying that I love working at the clinic. I love working with the animals. I love working with the staff. We have inside jokes now when I work with them of me having to wear a caution tag. But it's like, I can actually come into work and say, I love where I work. Whereas if I was in that day practice setting where it's like, here's who you are, but we need you to be this instead, I would have already left the field.
Right. And I think that when you talk about your job history and kind of the way that you've bounced around, the one thing you didn't mention was money. I don't know if you would ever have a problem making money. Like, you're a skilled person that's willing to work your ass off. Like, in theory, you could go anywhere and make enough money to sustain yourself comfortably. But what you had mentioned was, a corporate environment tried to put you into a box, and then the sales environment tried to put you into a box, and you didn't like either of those, and it was, nope, I'm gone.
High school tried to put me in a box, and nope, I'm gone.
So, like, excuse me. There's some wisdom to be had in that, and that's why I love like your story, at least as I know it, and because like I said, I've seen it from the beginning, and I didn't even know what the words were when I first met you and we first started working together, because it was like, no, Molly, don't change who you are. And like, there were definitely times where we were working with other people that don't work here anymore. And it's like, well, you would ask me, like, what do I have to do to change to make this better? And I'd say nothing. Like not that I wouldn't say anything, but you change nothing. Like, sometimes you just have to stick to your guns, and they have to come around to who you are, because knowing, when you have a little bit more insight as to what's actually happening, or knowing the way in which those variables are playing against each other, thankfully I was in a position to know some of that stuff. I can clearly remember it's like, nah, just ride it out. Like, they're going to have to learn, because there wasn't anything inherent, like you were doing something wrong. Like, you weren't being intentionally malicious. Like, the way in which the question was asked was, I see a communication gap that is inhibiting our ability as a team to serve the patient. how do I close that gap? Well, it's like, well, you just keep serving the patient, because they're actually the ones that have the wrong mindset. They're not thinking about serve the patient. So until they come to that part of the table, it's you win. Like there's no way of getting around that. Like how was that process for you, and like just kind of toughen that out, and knowing that you were around some people that maybe didn't fit the setting the greatest, or like you just had those significant barriers in communication, knowing that the intention was to serve the patient?
That was a challenge. It's a huge challenge when you're both there for the same reason.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to serve the patient. They want the best outcome of the patient, but not being able to communicate that with somebody, either because they don't want to listen, or because you don't want to explain it well enough, because one, you've had enough of them, they're not listening to you, there's no respect or anything like that there. It's a huge barrier, and then it's like a brick wall that you just can't break down. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? How does this change? And it's like, nope, I just kept doing my job, and it was like, and I'm not going to change how I'm going to communicate with you. And either way, it works out in the end. They either hang out, they figure out how to start communicating with you, or like you said, they leave because they're not a good fit.
Well, right. And I think that's another one of those things where the toppled hierarchy, right? That was one of the biggest things in that process of, I actually think that got brought up. Actually, a couple podcasts ago, we had brought up the first after action.
That was with Lauren and Christina.
Yeah, that hot box.
The 4.5 hour long after action. Molly comes off of like working an 18-hour shift, gets a 2-hour nap in, and then goes sits in it after action for 4.5 hours.
And you weren't even the one that was passing out. The one that was on hydro was.
I mean, I do give her credit. She did show up after having a major abdominal surgery.
Toughed it out.
Yep.
But like that was, kind of the thing, right? Of, in that moment, like, and especially thereafter, and that was the realization of like, well, yeah, Molly's blunt, and, she said some stuff, and,
I remember that. I remember that case to a T.
Do you?
I still remember that case. I remember the after action. I remember it.
We still have all of the big 3x5 note cards too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they're still all at the city house.
Yep.
I remember almost nothing out of it, to be perfectly honest.
I remember it because it allowed me to be in my head to be like, I fucking told you so.
Yeah. And the thing that I think is worth highlighting in that is the reason that I've never really challenged you on who you are is because I don't know if you've ever walked into work with a mindset that's outside of serve the patient. Do you ever find, have you?
Not that I've ever noticed.
Do you ever waver on that, or like, do you ever catch yourself? Because I think we all waver on it. I think naturally when we're in like difficult circumstances, like we're just getting our ass kicked, difficult caregivers, that sort of stuff. Like there is a little bit of a self-defense mode. At the end of this summer, we all were in survival mode, right? Like a part of that is like, I need to focus on me. And when I'm focused on me, it's harder to focus on serve the patient. How do you feel like you waver on that? Like do you ever catch yourself out of it where you have to like, nope, Molly, you got to go this way? Or is it, do you think that you're pretty steady on that? And even though you have your ebbs and flows, like you never really get off of that?
I would say even through the summer when I'm here, I'm here to work. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter how tired I am or what's going on in my personal life. If I'm having a bad day, if there are times I do walk in, and as Annie says, I come in a little hot. Normally when those days go on, I just go take 5 minutes outside to myself and then re-enter in the room. But when I'm here to work. It doesn't matter what I have going on in my personal life. So I try not to like waver too outside of the lines. It's like, yeah, I'm a little tired today. Yeah, I'm a little crabby, but it's like, nope, we're still just going to do what we need to do.
Yeah, that's, I think from a team sustainability and kind of just maintaining that mindset is probably one of the most valuable things that we have as a whole. And actually, to this point, I've worked equal amounts of time with yourself, Sarai, and Trevor. But I think that especially since we moved and in the last year, they've even come more towards the way in which you handle that, where it's like, it is what it is. We're going to get done what we're going to get done, and then we're going to be done with it. Like, it's just, there's not even a, like, emotional, it's a struggle. It's not easy to do. But the fact that we're all here to do it, let's just get it done. And I think it's kind of just a cool transition that's kind of happened. And now, even especially with the fact that we ended up busy 24 hours a day for 10 months, even now that's one of those things that it's a mindset that's shifted up into when the sun is up, and now even the lines between the day crew and the night crew, even though there's been deliberate measures to try and get rid of that, those lines have been blurred just by nature of influence, and just like, we're just gonna get it done, guys.
Yep.
Also, the days that you work 10 to 10 a.m. to p.m. are some of my favorite days.
I don't know. Have you ever actually been in the clinic when I worked a.m. to p.m.?
Oh yeah. And things get done.
I mean, I did work one week an a.m. to a p.m. and it resulted in a 30-minute phone call to Carlo. Me just like, what the fuck just happened this weekend? Like, I don't understand why I feel like I just jumped off a cliff and survived, and I'm so tired. Like, I worked 4 days in a row on an overnight shift, and I think it equals out to almost 72 hours in those 4 days. Yeah. It's like, and I just worked 24 and 2 12-hour shifts. Like, what happened? And
yeah, it's a lot. It's a ton. But there's also, like, that's one of the nice things about, like, kind of blending everybody out is we've because you are unique, we've had the opportunity as a team to appreciate the value of it and kind of, lean that way when we have to, I guess, is maybe a better way to put it. And also for yourself, like, when it's not super crazy busy, like, sometimes you can sit down.
I do remember that at the beginning after COVID happened and we started entering in winter, and we'd have a couple of those nights where we had a little bit, and I'm watching everyone and they're all like clinic's clean at this point. Now they're just wandering around trying to keep themselves busy because, like, of the mindset, like, I'm here to work. And it's like, okay, I get that, but, like, sit down and relax. Take 15 minutes to yourself and relax, because you're not going to get this very often. Yeah. It's like, I know the moment summertime comes and it's like, here we go again. Like, okay, let's just do this. And part of me is like, I'm a little nervous. Like, how is this going to work? And it's like, and we'll just do it.
Yep. It's at this point, it's the end of March. How's your mindset? Like, you ready?
Bring it on.
It's happening. Like,
let's just start it now so we can finish it down in next December.
Can we just keep ripping this Band-Aid off?
Like, let's just rip it off. Let's just start the summertime. Like, let's just do it now.
Molly, this was at this point we're actually over an hour. In case you were,
I have not wondered.
I have some other stuff that I got to get set up in here, but I'm glad we got to do this. I think that your story and kind of who you are is something that can be, I mean, you already know it. Like, there's an understanding that you can provide to some other people that I think is pretty valuable. And just be if you're unique, be who you are, and everyone's unique, so just be who you are, right? And when you're going through the process of getting into the right place, maybe you'll be a little less decisive than Molly is, but understanding that if you feel like something's off, try to put a solution in place, and then if that doesn't work, like, go find another thing, because you can find the right place for you at some point. And for you, it took a while, and you had your ups and your downs and all that sort of stuff, but you didn't really lose who you were, and you didn't let somebody else tell you who you were supposed to be. And because of that, even though there are other things that are stressful in life, at the very least, Molly is Molly, and there's no doubting of that, and that's not a stressor in your life. And I think that's something that has really maintained your self-worth and actually your real worth as well, because it's you being you has been extremely valuable to those that are around you in their professional setting as well. So thank you for coming on here. I'm glad, like, I know these always start out, it's like super weird. Like, I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but I think it went all right.
I can take this conversation and I can go 8 different other directions and talk about so many other things that pertain to CVTs.
I mean, I'm all in on that. The caveat is we can only do this 1 out of every 3 weeks because you need to sleep too. So
I mean, trying to talk to me after I finish a shift, not a good idea.
I mean,
there's a lot of slap happy or crabby that sometimes comes out of it.
I was gonna say that one of these days I'll get you in here on like that Sunday to Monday morning.
Oh, that slap happy stage.
Day.
Oh, God.
Yep. And that, but we won't talk about anything serious.
We'll just sit up here and bullshit the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
So yeah, any other final thoughts that you would want to share with the world while you have a microphone in front of you?
No, not that I can think of right now.
All right, fair enough. Well, I'm going to do the outro, and then we're going to go do other stuff.
Okay, fantastic.
All right, thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.